Hello and welcome. Thank you all so much for being here on this lovely September day. My name is Kate Kemper. I'm an associate director in the Center for Service Learning. My roles really revolve around student engagement and civic engagement. So I'm excited to be here today with all of you. We are super excited to kind of continue our Educate and Act series. This is our third year of the series and our 11th installment. So the goal of this series, which we host alongside the Commons and the Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity, is to offer opportunities to learn about a variety of topics and issues that are relevant to engaging in democracy from on-campus and community experts, including students, faculty, nonprofit professionals, and more. Our goal is really for all of you to leave these programs feeling educated about the topic and empowered to engage in some sort of action related to that topic, moving away from the conversation. So before we get into the topic for today, I'm going to turn it over to Emily Ryan, the Director of the Commons, to do a little bit of a land acknowledgement and welcome. So go ahead, Emily.
Thanks, Kate. As always, an honor to be here for the series. I want to remind us today that we are addressing upcoming elections and what democracy looks like in 2022 during this event today in the United States and in the state of Kansas. However, these are not the only governments to have existed on this land, and we think about our place in time, and I would invite us to consider governments that have existed prior to the adoption of the Kansas Constitution in 1861, specifically because the peoples who governed and lived here prior to that were forced to adopt new systems of laws as the United States expanded. It's important to note that the descendants of these peoples are still here today, and they are now subject to the laws of the current US policy. So as human residents of this land, we are all making decisions that have an impact far beyond our own species. And I'll speak just a little to that. In present day Lawrence, Kansas, we are residing on land that is nourished by both the Kansas River, which flows through to the north, and the Wakarusa River to our south. This place is home to human and more than human species, including plants like echinacea, silphium, and milkweed, and animals like red-tailed hawks, king snakes, and bison. It's also a temporal home to many who have moved through this place both by choice and by force. And in this season, we find ourselves amid a critical time of vulnerability and transience, in particular for those who find themselves on the move, which is modeled almost very soon by the biannual migrations through this place made by the monarch and many others. This land is characterized by wetlands, rolling hills, and also prairie. As present-day occupants of the land, we are not far removed from a history that tells us the original human stewards of this place were forced to move when the U.S. federal government took the land in 1825. As we know today, in the state of Kansas, this land is still home to many First Nations people, including the many students, staff, and faculty at both the University of Kansas and Haskell Indian Nations University, whose collective wisdom expands our potential as humans and relatives, and whose individual experiences and ways of knowing and relating to the land are vast and many. So I am offering this statement today in continued commitment to support and help create a present and future where their systems of knowledge may not be lost and their lives not further made worse by acts of colonialism. Thank you for allowing that this morning.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. So moving into kind of our topic for today, as a reminder, our session is focused on the upcoming general election. So we'll be discussing a variety of things, including kind of the impact of redistricting on this election, the August primary turnout, and kind of what we could expect to see as a result of that in the fall, and really what's on the ballot. So one adjustment to our speaker lineup for today, unfortunately, Paul Buskirk is unavailable to join us as he's not feeling well, but we'll have even more time with the panelists that we do have to be able to have conversation throughout this time. We'll start with some introductions from each of our four panelists, in which they will share kind of their perspective and lens into today's topic and just introduce themselves and what they do. And then I'll move through a set of 5 kind of predetermined questions about some of the topics I mentioned. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and conversation after that kind of formal set of the program. So please feel free to share questions in the chat and we'll pose as many of those as we can kind of at the end. So we'll go in the following order for introductions. I'm just doing alphabetical by last name. So Donnavan, Lindsay, Ursula, and then Marcus. So you each have, 3 to 5-ish minutes to share with us about who you are, what you do, and how your work really connects to the upcoming election. So Donnavan, we'll start off with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Donnavan Dillon, and I'm a sophomore here at KU studying political science and sociology. I also am a member of Loud Lights team, which is a youth voting rights organization, and I serve as our organizer around community engagement. In my time at Loud Light, I was a part of our student power campaign as a fellow. Then I took over the campaign in the spring semester. And then over the past summer, I did a lot of work around the amendment and just community organizing in general. And kind of my bread and butter is like youth power and youth like voting rights. So that's kind of why I'm here today. And I'm hopefully will be able to share that with perspective with you guys.
It's my turn, isn't it? Alphabetical order. I'm Lindsay Ford. I work for a nonpartisan nonprofit organization called the Voter Network. We're based in Kansas. I've been doing this since 2018, and one of our big goals is really to demystify the voting process and politics in general in Kansas to make it more accessible for folks, but also to empower people to vote and also engage in politics and in government and in their communities. And we provide tools for voters and partners and people in the state related to elections and voting, including like a nonpartisan ballot guide. We're about to launch a year-round tool where you can put in your address and all of your elected officials will pop up with links out to their social media pages and access to their contact information and, just tools to make it easier to figure out who represents you. But I think about this November election and my role and the Voter Network's role in it, also to demystify what's on the ballot. Traditionally, turnout in midterms is pretty low in this state, around 50%. And so there are a lot of people who won't be voting or aren't planning to voting, and we're trying to figure out ways to reach those people. But there's also some really funky stuff on this ballot, a couple of constitutional amendments that are really confusing and could have big ramifications for this state.
Awesome. Ursula, you're up.
Hello, my name is Ursula Miner. I'm a lifelong Lawrence resident. I'm president of the Lawrence branch NAACP. I have been, I think, for 20 years, something like that. It's been quite a while. I'm looking through the lens of the top 5 issues that are facing the Black community. The NAACP did a poll. So these are the top 5: racism and discrimination, inflation, cost of living, criminal justice reform, police brutality, affordable housing and rent, and gun violence. So what our goal is to make sure that the Black community is aware of the candidates and what they stand for, so they can elect candidates who improve Black lives, elect a U.S. Senate and Congress members that pass laws to impact the right to vote and police accountability, elect your next governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and others who make decisions on distributing federal funds and appointing state judges. There's just so that they understand what's out there and who's running and what they support, so they can make an informed decision. Thank you.
I think that leaves me. My name is Marcus Winn. I am the Director of Voter Engagement at More Squared, which stands for Metro Organization for Racial and Economic Equity. More Squared is a local affiliate based in Kansas City of a national network called the Gamaliel Network. Most people have not heard of it, but we do have a small claim to fame in that a community organizer named Barack Obama used to be a Gamaliel organizer in Chicago. And so we're part of that network that's about 40 to 50 local affiliates around the nation. I have been with More Squared since early 2018. I started as the Wyandotte County community organizer, which is where I still live, Wyandotte County, Kansas. During the last 5 years or so, we've really focused on building grassroots movements locally to take on issues like criminal legal reforms. In the last 5 years, we have pushed and received the resignation of the KCK PD chief of police. We've secured funding for a community integrity unit out of the district attorney's office. And we've worked with partners like the district attorney to establish a public defender's office in Wyandotte County, which never existed before and is going to be implemented over the next year or two. We've also focused on issues of immigrant rights in Wyandotte County. We were a proud member, along with others here, of the Safe and Welcoming Wyandotte Coalition, which sought to establish municipal ID for all residents of the county, as well as institute some basic common sense barriers between local law enforcement and immigration enforcement federally. Unfortunately, though, we passed that after a lot of work locally, we were preempted by the state earlier this year. So there's still a lot of work to do, but we really see our role in this whole landscape as using voter engagement from a nonpartisan perspective in order to shift some power about who has the power to make decisions in our state from the hands of sort of concentrated few to more distributed, more at the grassroots level, to better embody what democracy looks like in Kansas.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do and kind of how you come to this work. The first of our 5 kind of pre-selected questions is about redistricting. So as we know, every decade we have the census, and that impacts our districts and where we're voting and what we're voting on. So how has redistricting impacted this upcoming election and the potential outcomes? That's our first question. I do want to preface that not every single one of you has to answer every single one of these questions. Really pick the ones that you feel most comfortable and confident in being able to answer, because there's a lot of different knowledge going on here. So again, how has redistricting impacted this upcoming election process and the potential outcomes?
Now we're just going to wait each other out. Okay, I'll start. Redistricting happens every 10 years after we complete a census count in this state. And redistricting, this is the first, so after the census happens on the decade, it takes the legislature a little while to create new maps. And so this is the first year that we are voting with these new maps. And we voted under new political districts in August, and we will again in November. And there were some big changes that happened across the state in the process of redistricting. We had a couple, I think it'll be most noticeable at the congressional level. We have 4 congressional districts in the state. Wyandotte County was split in half. And so half of Wyandotte County was moved out of the 3rd congressional district. Lawrence was moved out of the 2nd congressional district, which is a big deal, and into the 1st. And so that will be, I think, for your audience, where they'll see the biggest change. But also, there are a lot of changes that happened at the state level and in local districts at the precinct boundary level. And so just big picture, a lot of us will be voting in new places for new people. And so while voting is, I think, always a little bit confusing, it's going to be extra confusing this time, especially for people who have moved or have been moved in this process and are voting on new people and in new places.
Yeah, kind of just going off of that, I think it's going to create a lot of confusion, and kind of has with like the August 2nd amendment, because you have people who like lived in like areas for like, potentially their entire lives and have always voted, in the same way for like the same people. And now you have completely new districts. I also was like a part of that lawsuit. And I know that the redistricting will have like a big impact on like those higher level offices in Congress. I think it made some races a lot more competitive, especially in the 3rd congressional district. But I also know that redistricting will have a big impact on like the power that communities of color and like minority communities have had in elections, especially around like Wyandotte. So that's something to look out for, but I don't think we'll really see those effects until after this election. So that will be something to look forward to. And I know in organizing spaces is something that people are looking a lot towards too, and how to like organize around that, because we are stuck with those maps for the next 10 years. And I know, especially in regards to August 2nd with the lawsuit, it messed up timelines a lot, especially for like county elections offices. So like making sure like people get information on where they're voting, how they're voting, and what ballots they're receiving for like what candidates was like a big issue. And that kind of muddled up this past election, but hopefully will be resolved by the time November comes around.
I would just add, as somebody who lives in Wyandotte County, I'll go on record in saying I don't think that the redistricting process was done in good faith. And the maps were drawn explicitly to dilute the power of voters of color in this state. And I think it's important to name that. Lindsay and Donnavan both mentioned, the congressional districts and the maps, and I think that's those are really important and clearly going to have implications for not just Kansas politics, but and if the federal balance of power for the House of Representatives is close, these gerrymandered districts have the potential to really swing things one way or the other. I think more locally, another like lower profile map that could have really strong implications is the State Board of Education. While Wyandotte was divided between 2 congressional districts, we were actually divided between 3 State Board of Education districts. And that's clearly to dilute, again, the power of Wyandotte County voters, who tend to be less white than the rest of the state. So these buzz issues around critical race theory, guns in schools, I think they're all impacted by a very biased map around the State Board of Education. And it is going to cause a lot of confusion, but I think there's also a lot of good work. The Voter Network has ksballot.org, which I think is a great resource that we refer people to a lot. If they are confused about what's on their ballot, I'm not sure when that goes live, but I'll bet Lindsay does.
Any minute. It goes live any minute.
Along with what everybody's saying, that is true. It's going to really hurt the minority vote, where the district is when they've been drawn and where the splits are and things. It's going to be pretty hard, and it's going to be more important to educate people on who they're voting for and as much power as you do have left. But that's just going to be so important right now. It can't resolve anything, but just to make sure people know what's going on and where they vote, that's just going to be really, really important this year.
Awesome. Yeah. And Emily Ryan, I know you had a question that you wanted to ask about redistricting.
Yeah, so we had a question from somebody in attendance about where we can learn more about how redistricting happens, in terms of the relationship between the census, but then also how the decisions are made, as Marcus, you were sort of alluding to initially, and now Ursula's also mentioned.
There were a number of C3 organizations or nonpartisan organizations that came together to form a coalition called KS Fair Maps. I'll put the link in the chat here in a second, to really push back, especially on the process of redrawing those maps and the lack of transparency in that process. And I'm not sure the website has been updated since sort of the final decision came down. I think a lot of folks in this coalition were really excited to see the verdict come out of Wyandotte County that that claimed that these maps were racially gerrymandered, and then that just didn't stand up at the next level of court decision. So oops, I went to paste in the link and I pasted in my own home address. I don't want to give all of you that. Hold on. It's ksfairmaps.org. I think we'll have some good background on how that process went down this year. And I know that a lot of the folks in that coalition, you'll see the list of them there, the ACLU, the Kansas African American Affairs Commission, the Voter Network, are trying to figure out now how to kind of stay engaged around this process, and particularly at the legislative level and around transparency issues, to make sure it doesn't, or maybe we can work this in a more fair way a decade from now.
Yeah, I would also say there was a lot of really good media coverage, especially by like more politically centered papers that follow, the state legislator. And a lot of those articles were really insightful and like explain the process really in a way that's like accessible for people who aren't like too involved in politics or kind of have some background around the process or what's happening. And those were like really, really helpful. I know there were also like quite a few experts in Kansas, especially coming from some of the universities, that played a big role in some of the litigation in regards to like the lawsuit. So just like reaching out to some of those people could also be a really good resource to get some of that deeper insight.
Awesome. Thank you all. And if anybody else has additional links, resources, anything that you want to share, I am pulling those out of the chat as we go, and I'll send out a follow-up communication to everybody with those things. So as we go through, if there's things that people want to be dropping in the chat, I will keep track of those and share them in a follow-up communication. We did talk a little bit just kind of in the redistricting conversation about the primary, and I think that's something that a lot of us are still kind of like, I can't believe what happened, and the amount of turnout that we had was just incredible for, a non-election year, non-presidential election year primary. So would love to hear more about your thoughts about what kind of the expected implications of that massive turnout are going into the upcoming general election. What can we maybe expect to see? Do we think that turnout's going to be really high in the general because it was high in the primary? Just, I would love to get people's thoughts and kind of ideas about what that might kind of impact for the general.
I started last time.
I mean, I can start. I don't know that I have the answer to the question. I think the turnout in August was pretty unprecedented, and so the short answer is I think we're in uncharted territory, and it's all speculatory. I think, my clear hope is that I think there's definitely opportunity, and what happened in August is a glimpse of what is possible in Kansas politics when we do that foundational work of getting out and talking to folks. There's really no shortcut for that. I think what drove the turnout was obviously it was a hot button issue that a lot of people cared about, but there was a massive and really great field campaign that was driven by everyday folks who wanted to talk to their neighbors, their friends, their family members, and make sure everybody who was eligible was participating. And I think, when the electorate of Kansas actually reflects the population of Kansas, good things happen.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. On the organizing side of things, I think what we saw in Kansas was like so beautiful in regards to like everyone kind of like working together as like a coalition to ensure like people were like educated and mobilized around the amendment, kind of on like both sides of the amendment, I would even say. And I know that like there was a lot of work to reach like specific populations. Like I know Loudlight did a lot of work to reach out to young voters and have a campaign that like centered them and stuff like that, which was really beautiful to see. And I also think a lot of it was due to, it was like what the people wanted, and not like you voting for some like politician who like may or may not like reflect your values. It was putting the people in charge of their future in the state of Kansas. And I think that's what got a lot of people to the polls. And I think some people are being a bit naive in saying that, you know, like this turnout will necessarily translate into the midterm, because although there are some like amendments on the ballot, you're voting for people. And I think through the amendment, we can see that people care about action. And I think there's a lot of like lip service when it comes to candidates and what they say they support versus what ends up happening in the session. So I think if people want to see the turnout that we had in November, they need to take in August, they need to take lessons from that and move forward. We're also just now getting data from the Secretary of State's office, which I really love looking at. And I just like have some numbers pulled up that I think are really cool. So since Roe v. Wade was overturned, 51,000 people registered to vote in Kansas from like that to like the deadline. 52% of that was first-time voters. 3/4 of that were people under 30. 63% of that was women. And then overwhelmingly, people in that group were unaffiliated. And I think that's something that people need to take note of, is that these people aren't your average like party line voters, or even not care enough, but like don't necessarily want to be associated with a political party. So I think when we start looking at things like that, it shows the work that needs to be done in order to have the turnout and people showing up in the ways that they did on the 2nd.
Along with what Donnavan said, it's when there's something like a hot topic that people are really interested in, they'll be more apt to show up to vote. But when things level out, there's just going to have to be a lot of feet on the ground and a lot of information, a lot of education on why people should vote. I think that's what is going to have to happen during this session. Making sure people just they get out there, they know what they're voting for, they know who they're voting for, and mainly that you educate people on why they should vote. There's a lot of things out there, but sometimes people really just don't know, or they're just disillusioned from whatever happened in the past. So I would say that just making sure we get out there and just make sure people know what they're voting for and educate them, and that that's what you have to do.
I'm not sure I have much to add, except that I think the conversations that have happened on the organizer side since August 2 have been really exciting. And it'll be a challenge to figure out how to engage new voters and people motivated by this issue who maybe aren't coming out to vote in midterms or for candidates. It'll be challenging, but it's been cool to have these conversations with partners across the state.
Awesome. Thank you all. We got a question about what the best way to educate would be. We can address that now. So the question is, what is the best way to educate? Thinking back to the August 2 issue, the wording was so confusing for a lot of people. So, strategies that maybe you all, as people out in the field doing this work, have seen that have been useful or not useful when it comes to how we're educating about what is on the ballot. And once we discuss that, we'll actually talk about what is on the ballot. That's my next question.
Well, they certainly the question plays into your what's on the ballot topic, because we do have 2 constitutional amendments on the November ballot that I think are even more confusing maybe than the wording that was on the August 2 ballot. And after this year, you might think like man, these constitutional amendments, they just keep coming around, but this is actually pretty rare. In Kansas, this is a new tool that our legislature has decided to try out. So they have to have 2/3 a majority of the legislative body vote to put one of these constitutional amendments on the ballot. And really, they haven't done that in the past. And now we're seeing these come up this year. I mean, I think one thing that I think was helpful for August and will be helpful for November is really making sure that we're communicating with each other, those of us that are doing this work around the state, and making sure that we are on the same page. And so to that end, we had a call last week with a lot of partners who are doing voter engagement or around the state, and we brought in a professor from Wichita State who kind of walked through the language on the ballot for us. And I mean, we're doing this, I'll just say, a lot of us do this for a living, and we still think these two constitutional amendments are wildly confusing. I mean, I've spent a lot of hours in the last week trying to write language to explain these two constitutional amendments. And then, and so is the League of Women Voters, and so is Loud Light, and so are a lot of our partners. And what we're going to try to do is get on the same page so that we're using kind of similar language and similar messaging, and then getting it out through as many channels and in as many mediums as possible. And I think we did a pretty good job with that before August 2. And that help kind of lay the groundwork for what we're trying to do for November.
Yeah, kind of just echoing some of those same sentiments and adding a bit. I think on the organizing side, like Lindsay was saying, having one central message, especially so like it's like repetition, like you keep hearing the same thing, so you just like understand it really well. But then I think something that like August like really showed is that we really have to look at like accessibility in terms of like information, like who has access to like what we're providing and who we're really reaching out to. And I think that plays out in like a lot of different ways and has like really big impacts on like the turnouts that we see. And unless we like really dive into like accessibility of like information and our outreach, we can't really complain about the effects that it has on like the election.
I agree, going along with what Lindsay said too, about, you know, having kind of a united front and working together. We partner with the League of Women Voters quite a bit, and some other organizations that have like things with us and us with them. That does make a difference too, so you can come out with the same information. And something we found that works really well is just getting out there in the public. Like we'll go down en masse and have a table out and just talking to the people. I think that makes a big difference, is getting out there, setting up a table when there's events, just as much as possible to have talking points and have those conversations. I think sometimes that helps people along too. There's lots of ways to educate people, but a lot of it is just getting out there.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. The only thing I would add is I think messaging only gets us so far. And I think messaging is really important, and we all do it. Trying to figure out what's the most effective, clear way to raise awareness and educate the public about, you know, what these, you know, the amendments, for instance, are really intentionally confusing, in my opinion. However, I think, you know, there's been a lot of good research done on what moves people to actually participate in the process. And I think the data is really conclusive. The messenger is a lot more impactful than the message itself. Mm-hmm. And so one of the most powerful things that any of us can do is start talking to the people that we know, who already are in our circles. We have trusted relationships. When you go and talk to, you know, 5 to 10 people who you already can assume pretty confidently share your values and vision for what our community should look like, That's a really powerful thing in order to make an impact at local and even larger levels, getting new people involved. If you talk to the people you know, that's so much more effective than even those of us who do this every day, because we have to build up that rapport.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Marcus. And those of us who are like trying to muddle through these constitutional amendments and pare them down and make them accessible, a lot of us are writing them in a way that is nonpartisan and friendly and shareable in a lot of contexts. And we've become a country that's more scared, I think, to talk about voting and democracy in our places of work, in our places of worship, with our friends, and we're trying to encourage people and partners to push out this information. Like voting isn't political, and voting in November shouldn't be. And yeah, we are not the right messengers in most cases.
And kind of what Marcus touched on is like one of my favorite things about the kind of work that we do is that like no matter like how much you like necessarily like knowing anything means that you can be a resource for someone else. Whether that's like, oh, I know that like KS Votes is a really great resource for getting registered, or like even if like you're an expert on like the amendments and can like share that. I think like having those face-to-face one-on-one conversations with people just gets more people knowledge on the issue, and that leads to like better participation, and also builds up dialogue around like having conversations with people you care about like politics and like the shape of like our world, which I think is really beautiful.
That's awesome. And that kind of leads into my next question. So if we all are going to be, advocates in our communities and in our circles, we also need to know what the heck is going to be on the ballot. So what government positions and constitutional amendments are we voting on in November? And why, from your perspective, are they important or meaningful? I know this is like a very short period of time to be talking about this, but I want to give everybody at least a little taste of what we could be seeing on the ballot and why it matters.
You mean you don't want me to just keep telling people that they are awful and not telling you what they are? I know, and I'll say too that the League of Women Voters, the Voter Network, our ballot guide, ksballot.org that Marcus referenced earlier, will all have a lot of this information out probably next week. But it's taken us a while to kind of dig through it. I can talk about the constitutional amendments a little bit. I'm going to pull up my own notes though. There are two on this ballot and everyone will be able to vote on them. The first one is called the Legislative Veto or Suspension of Executive Agency Regulations Amendment. Really rolls off the tongue. Really, if passed, it would, I'd say, increase the power of the Kansas legislature by allowing them to overturn any administrative agency decision with just a majority vote. And so that's not just the governor's office, it's also executive agency like the Kansas Department of Health and Environment or the Kansas Board of Education. Right now, if the legislature doesn't like a procedure proposed by one of those agencies, they can pass a law to amend it. This would change that, so they could just vote by simple majority to overturn one of those regulations. And so it reads executive agency, and I think a lot of people won't know that that could apply to some of these departments at the state that may be passing regulations around masks or around curriculum. And it's, I think really disrupts the balance of power, but we can come back to that. The second amendment is the Election of County Sheriffs Constitutional Amendment, HR 5022. Right now, counties can choose whether to elect or appoint their county sheriff. 104 of 105 counties in this state currently elect. Riley County, where Manhattan sits, does not. I think that's the case. This would mandate the election moving forward of county sheriffs in perpetuity. But the other big change, and it's pretty interesting and kind of confusing, is that right now, if you wanted to recall a sheriff, the power to initiate that process can happen by petition by voters, but it can also happen, the district attorney can initiate that process. And this would move that power from the district attorney's office to the attorney general. And I think a lot of people don't really know what the implication of that could be. And that's kind of the thing with these constitutional amendments. It feels like this process is so new for us, this kind of voting on constitutional amendments. They're very broad. The language is kind of confusing. I think a lot of us are worried about the potential impact that we don't know. We just don't know what the implications of some of these things are. But it's that kind of move from local control to state control over the recall of sheriffs that has some folks worried, I think. Who wants to talk about what else is on the ballot?
I can just give like a general rundown of maybe like some of the things, and then if we want to like deep dive into any of them. So we have like the high state office, so Congress, so US House and Senate. We have the governor and lieutenant governor's race, which I think has been called as one of the most contested in like the country, which is pretty big. And I think the 3rd congressional district has been as well. So those will be some pretty close and important races for Kansas. We have the attorney general, the secretary of state, the treasurer. I think there are a lot of like Supreme Court justices on the ballot, which I know is like an area of interest for a lot of people. And then you have like your House and local races, which are, although they're like more local, are very important, and we should not view them as like less important as any of these other bigger races.
I was just going to speak to Emily's question in the chat, which is there a better way to understand how these constitutional amendments came to the ballot? Like, what's the intention behind them? The content that I'm helping craft, that the League of Women Voters is crafting, will really be, well, it will certainly be nonpartisan, and we will try to dig into that. Although, and we're also trying to write different pieces at different lengths for different audiences, right? Like some of you really want to dig into this, but we know that most voters, unfortunately, start to tune in and pay attention to what's on their ballot about 4 days before an election. And so there's kind of this balance between giving folks enough information that they can really dig in if they want to, and also making it accessible. I know the League of Women Voters and the Mainstream Coalition, for example, has planned a series of events that they'll publish soon, where they're inviting panelists to come speak about these constitutional amendments and about the judges on the ballot. But I would say, like, look to our organizations maybe to get some good nonpartisan background, and then if you're looking for a partisan angle, there will be plenty of organizations that put out sort of their spin on this in the next probably couple of weeks.
Yeah. Oh, are you done?
Sorry, I was going to speak to the next question in the chat, but I'll just post it in there, Donnavan.
Oh, sorry. I just like read this like really good article on that exact thing published in the Kansas Reflector. So I'm just gonna send that in the chat. I think it like breaks down the amendments in a really accessible way and kind of talks about how they kind of came about. So hopefully that can like give you a little bit more insight.
Awesome. Other thoughts on, the importance of any of these positions that Donnavan mentioned? what would shift if, a different governor was elected, like all that kind of stuff. Let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the implications of some of those roles and what they mean to our state.
I can go ahead and go. I think for a lot of these races, for people in like organizing spaces, they have like really, really big impacts. And I'm specifically talking to like Secretary of State, Attorney General's office, and then the governor and like lieutenant governor. The governor and lieutenant governor, I think, kind of just like shape where Kansas is like headed and like its priorities. And I think between the two candidates, they're basically polar opposites. And I think that can have like a really big impact, especially for young people. I know in Kansas, we always talk about like, oh, like we have like people who come to the state for college, but then they leave with all their talent and like skills. And I think that's even creeping up into like people that are like a bit out of college. And I think a lot of that is because, as we can like kind of see, is that like our legislature and like the priorities of that don't align with like the priorities of like the people, which is a really big issue. And especially with like young people, like no one wants to be in a state where they feel like uncomfortable. They don't feel part of like the larger community, and also like we're lacking in like resources and access to things. So I think that's something that's really big. But just for like a bit of a background on the attorney general and secretary of state. So the attorney general is kind of like the top like legal officer. So they handle like kind of like legal priorities for like the state. And here at Loud Light, we actually have like a lawsuit that's like still going on after like a while that deals with like registering people to vote and the potential felony that people who do that kind of work can receive. And under the next attorney general, they could, they've already said that they would start like prosecuting people under that. So, I mean, even though like these like offices seem like they don't like have that much of like an impact on you maybe, or you might not know exactly what they do. Some of these shifts that can happen between like who gets voted into office can be like really detrimental to like a lot of the work that we do, and also have implications on just like your everyday Kansans.
I think all of these offices are really important and could have impact on people's everyday lives. I will say I have mixed feelings about some. I think some offices have really stark contrasts in choice, and then I think some of them, like, we don't have great options, in my opinion. And I think that's an attitude I hear a lot in talking with voters, particularly voters who are less frequent in participating, is this overall sense of, why does it matter? Maybe it feels like it's already determined who's going to win, or maybe it feels like I really don't like the candidates that I have to choose between. I don't feel like either of them or any of them really represent my vision of what I want my community to look like. And I will say, I think that disillusionment and frustration is really legitimate a lot of times. I think all of us on this panel have probably experienced disappointment, even with elected officials that we generally feel are more friendly than not. But what I usually tell people is, I don't want to patronize you. I think that like that's an understandable position. But if we want to change how that works, we've got to participate. And it's not that one candidate or another is going to fix everything or save us. It's about shifting power back to the community so we can hold accountable whoever is in office. And I think that's the long-term work that we all need to be doing.
I do agree that it just depends on who gets in office, and no vote at all to me is worse than you should vote. And I know people know that, but if you don't vote at all, it's just going to be an empty vote out there, and somebody's going to get in there that you may not really like. You may not like either one, but you might read their background and read up on what that person does or what they stand for. And you may find something that, even something small, that would give you a reason to at least vote on that one person. I mean, for instance, the governor proposes and passes new legislation, and they appoint state judges. You know, those things will have a direct effect on where you live and what you do. So a lot of it just, to me, falls back to education and what those, you know, who you're voting for, like governor or attorney or whoever, but what they do and how they will affect you on your level.
I think those are really great points. And I think a good kind of final message to sort of wrap things up on is any sort of insights logistically about the voting process this fall. Anything that's different than in years past. I know there have been potential bills about ballot drop boxes or, mail-in ballots and different policies around that. Is there anything that people should be on the lookout for that may be different than in previous years as they're deciding how to vote in terms of logistics?
If you haven't voted since 2020, we saw a lot in 2020, but a lot of county clerks and election offices in 2020 mail out advance ballot applications. That won't happen in most places this year. There are a couple of counties that still do that. Voting by mail is a really easy option in Kansas, but you do have to request that ballot is mailed to you, and you can do that at ksvotes.org. I do it every election cycle, but there were some just differences in 2020 where offices and clerks were actually mailing those applications out. So don't expect that. The constitutional amendments are probably the biggest difference. The fact that we'll vote in new places for new people, like Donnavan pointed out earlier, because of redistricting, could be challenging for some folks. I've heard that in a lot of places, the ballots will be really long because of these constitutional amendments. So make sure you flip it over. But I think those are the kind of logistically the biggest things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say most of the big voter suppression bills thankfully died within the session, which was really amazing, and I think saved a lot of people a lot of stress. But again, I know with August 2nd, some people didn't vote on the amendment because it was at the very bottom and really tiny print. So just being very diligent about filling everything out. I always tell people, even if you think you're registered to vote and everything, just go check your registration, your address, request a ballot if you need one. And then I know something that was really cool was Loud Light participated, and I think in conjunction with the ACLUs, that we did an election protection program. So for anyone who had issues at the ballot, you could call 866 our vote, and that'll be continuing. And that was really helpful in areas where just tiny issues popped up that people needed help with. I know in several places there were crazy long lines, and we tried to help find resolve with that. And that's in conjunction with the Secretary of State's office. So that's a resource that I always give to people if they have, something that happens on election day.
Awesome. Those are really great resources and reminders to read everything, flip it over, make sure you've got everything you need. That is awesome. So we just have a couple of minutes left. I know we've answered some participant questions throughout, so thank you all for asking and answering those questions. When I send out a follow-up email, I'll share some information about what campus and community partners can do to support student voting for faculty, staff, students, student organizations, and community organizations. So we'll have a lot of that information. There's also a lot of upcoming events, and I'll give some time to Emily and Megan to talk about some of the specific events that their offices are doing, Educate and Act and otherwise. But I'll share some additional links and resources to some upcoming opportunities to learn more about some of these topics and kind of continue your education in the civic space. So Emily and Meg, if you all want to quickly touch on upcoming Educate and Acts and any other programming related to some of these topics that you want to talk about.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I'll just quickly mention the next event in this series, the Educate and Act, will be on October 6th. That's a Thursday at noon. And it will focus on the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is something else that's been passed. It was passed in the 70s and is being challenged now. So the Supreme Court will hear a case about it in November. So this is an opportunity to learn more about it and also what that decision might potentially mean. And then we also have a reproductive rights series that's happening right now. And the next event in that series will be on October 12th. Which I think is a Wednesday evening, and that will center different populations in ways that across the country, different reproductive legislation is affecting different populations differently, the inequities involved with that, basically. Meg, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, hi everybody. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes, okay, great. Yes, thank you all for being here and for your insights. This was really interesting and informative. We have a zine night at the museum going on tonight. So if folks are interested, we'll be convening at the Spencer Museum of Art at 6:30. And we will be working on pages for a collaborative zine project that the Emily Taylor Center is hosting with a variety of partners, including the Commons, called Disability Justice is a Feminist Issue. And that zine project is meant to complement the KU Common Book. And so we'll be taking inspiration from the KU Common Book as well as the KU Common Work of Art, which my colleague and friend Adina Duke at the Spencer will discuss and show us tonight. Basically, we're inviting people to submit an 8.5 by 11 inch page that will be compiled in a zine, and then which is a self-published magazine, and then we will do a release and reflection event around that in the spring. So even if you're unable to attend tonight, you're still very welcome to contribute to that. And as for the third Educate and Act of the semester, we're going to be focusing on reproductive justice organizing and what worked this past summer, and hoping to get people from a variety of different organizations that were working on that campaign in various different ways. And so seeing how do different organizations organize, what were some of the strategies and tactics that were used, how did they differ, how are they similar, and how do we move forward? So those are some upcoming events. And then also we're revving up for our Feminist Fright Fest, which is an annual month-long exploration of horror and spooky season stuff as with a feminist bent. So be on the lookout for that as well. I think we're gonna end up hosting about 6 or 7 events. Haven't finalized that schedule, but would love to have folks attend that too. So thank you so much, everybody, again, for sharing all of your insights today.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for spending the time with us today. I know we kept you a couple of minutes over, but be on the lookout for a follow-up email from me with a bunch of different resources that were shared. If any panelists have additional resources they want to send me to include, I'm happy to do that. And we'll try and get that out in the next few days. Thank you all so much again for being here, and have a great rest of the week.
Thanks all.